Say what's up, VJ, the brother from the ancient mother. Once again, you are watching The Headspace, Africa's most poignant hip-hop podcast, where we profile, cover, dissect the active movement of hip-hop on the continent. Now, you're watching the review segment, and as usual, we shine light front and center on some of the most interesting projects historically and presently. Now we're doing the historical aspect. We've been doing a series of anniversary release reviews to kind of pay homage to some of the most monumental musical projects that have hit our continent. A lot of them particularly coming from South Africa. No bias, it just happens that we're more attuned to the cultural links of the history of our rap. But if you are from Moz, Tanzania, anywhere on the continent, and you feel like you have a thread of historical rap albums that basically molded the climate of your space, holla at us, because again, this is not a South African zone. What we want to do on this platform is to profile rap, hip-hop as it's grown throughout every aspect and pocket of this beautiful continent. Now, without any further ado, this group is basically a super powerful unit that was formed as a coming together of threads from Botswana, mainly Drastic, coming together with his fellow comrades to form what would later be one of the most monumental record labels in South Africa's rap climate. I'm talking about Unreleased Records, and this was basically their emergence into a whole clique, which was a really coming together of the scattered Joburg mass ultra underground lyrical heads who found affinity with each other and became known as Cashless Society. Definitely one of the most succinctly impactful groups that I think South Africa has heard, mainly from the fact that they rap primarily in English, but they did it in a way which had its feet firmly grounded on South African referencing and the climate of what it means to come from the political hotspot that is Azania. Now, they released a beautiful project which is now 20 years old. Can you believe it? Like, when I take the time to grasp how the flow of change has moved and how projects I basically grew up listening to and matured as a hip-hop head in this country have aged into fully grown adult beings with a life that you question in its essence, and you ask yourself, after 20 years, what can really be said about this project? And that's what I'm here to shine a light on. Now, first and foremost, back to when it was released, we're basically talking about the golden era of South African rap. It's a time where the market is beginning to realize that there's a real need for diversity amongst the youth. There's a demand for a rap that is rendered in a way that's closer to home. POC have set the benchmark. Ammunition and cats like that who come as attachments of this Joburg hub of rap are showing rappers in the underground, quote unquote, that there is hope to give and illustrate the window of rap music into the South African mass. But there's only one rule. The rule is authenticity, because when we're influenced by this diaspora that comes into contact with us as Africans living on the motherland, there tends to be the immediate sense of mimicry in our step, and a lot of rappers who were directly in that climate moved on is just their sheer Americanized influence, and very few of them questioned the continental political repercussions of the styles that they were beginning to manifest around their environments. Not Cashless. These were cats who began to understand the importance of how authenticity is done, not only in a way that flips rap on its linguistic platform of just basically rapping in your native dialect, but also to say it doesn't matter what dialect you rap in per se, it's about the world you paint. Is the world familiar or foreign to the people you're rapping for? Because one question that I always ask MCs on this podcast, for those you know, is going to be, who are you rapping for? And I think Cashless Society answered this question with bravado, with a flashback to that hyper grunge, industrial abstract rap set in the Johannesburg landscape. They're giving us the smog, they're giving us capitalism in its ripe, puke-infested, conflict-ridden, sparkly yet grungy and rusty aesthetic. They do this first and foremost by titling the project African Raw Material. Now, raw materials allude to that industrial fiber. Anything you see around in the city complex is made through raw materials, the metal, the bronze, the aluminium. So it's basically the smelting of Africa's raw guts from the underground. It's a metaphor for how capitalism takes its most powerful riches to make itself stand firmly from the depths of the African soil. And so this raw material, which is explicitly bound to the motherland, is something that they conceptually manifest through lyrical form. Now, all these cats are what you call rap ass niggas. That means they're hyper driven on lyrical locality. They are self-indulgently and unapologetically spoken word art, which does not depend on musical notation nor melodic structure to guide its flow. I mean, in other words, these guys don't give a shit about the beat. They drag it to wherever they want it to go. So if you're a person who gravitates more to music that happens to have rap on it, this was and probably will never be the project for you. But if you're somebody who, due to coming close to rap as part of the relationship with lyricism, and you love diving into a deep journey of basically literary skill manifested on an audio canvas, this is for you, because it's a lot of intense rapping. It's almost bloated with raps, and I think it would have been a little bit too drowned if it wasn't for the fact that be it haphazardly, be it mistakenly, or some twist of fate, drastic beats tend to be so stripped down, primal, and just basically conceptual threads of one-dimensional loops which are bereft of any real musical structure, that the MCs give the musicality through their individual voices. There's so much uniqueness in every member's skill, whether we're talking about the sharp illusions of an X amount, or the rough, rugged, and raw enunciation and imagery of a Snaz D, to Black Intellect's grounded raps, to Tiz Eye's more charismatic yet kind of compact and minimalistic flows. Every rapper and every member of the group contributed to the lot and the beautiful tempest which was Cashless Society. They're a crucible of underground Joburg rap which basically lights up a fire, and as a lyrical lover you're just drawn into their every metaphor, and what they're weaving is again the story of how modern day industrialism is robbing the African body of its unique incessant energy by using us as harvesting bodies for the matrix. So this idea that we're basically subjected to the megalith of a system which uses us as nothing but tubes of energy that it funnels its attention and culture on. So what can we do about that? How can we plug ourselves off and regain some semblance of freedom? And I think, as alluded in the album cover, with the kind of quote-unquote Bushmen throwing their rocks and attacking a system in the nearby distance, what this says is you have to have, one, the revolutionary affect and effect to fight capitalism in a way that's concealed but very focused. And how they do it is by knowledge of self. Cashless Society paints out a picture of the deadly ills of South Africa's so-called Rainbow Nation. They paint out everything from the taxi wars, which basically hold passengers hostage on their day-to-day journeys to wherever they want to go. And they profile so many different varieties of the South African life that when it comes to the mass appeal of this project, this is what stood out and kind of made the everyday South African listener go, this is interesting. This feels like some kids who are mimicking Americanism, but it's talking about things I'm familiar with. The hooting of the taxis, the looting in the city, the slang, the dialect of the people. They do it so clearly and articulately that I think even if you weren't an Uber rap fan, you could definitely appreciate where they were coming from with this. So this is definitely the era when the underground was beginning to understand how to communicate the ethos of rap and as a result hip-hop to the everyday person. Most importantly, in a way that was going to be undeniably African. Now, what does this Africanness that I'm always alluding to really mean? Is it some kind of mystical primal urge of the caveman in some distant time? What I feel African is, in simple, metaphoric or archetypal allusion, is this idea of earthiness. It's being grounded in the principle of nature. It's remembering what were the things that gave you life before life was hijacked by a hierarchy of human beings who want to subject you to nothing but a job. So these lyrics basically give, with a certain level of candor and playfulness, that very serious message in a way that you can appreciate through its vibrant and youthful tone. Now ultimately, I want to say something compact and final about this project, so here's what it is. There are times where, because drastic beats lended themselves too much to trend back then, like golden era boom bap trend, a lot of them don't really stick out originally. They feel very much like what you would have heard back then. 831 is basically like the 90s idea of what every rap song was. Accidental Heroes is this kind of thick cypher style rugged raps approach that you would have heard from everybody from Redman to the Wu-Tang. And I think the tracks which really stand out as a markedly different approach, even on the production landscape, had to be the two singles. Hot Tot Hop, 1212 and Taxi Wars are different in the way that they even approach themselves sonically. And I don't know if that was planned or that just happened to be, but they're really the two tracks that starkly stand out in terms of originality. Everything else here kind of lies very dormantly in the underground rap tropes that you expect, and if it wasn't for the fact that these are some incredibly dope MCs, this would have been a mid project. Thank God these motherfuckers were saying something so poignant, were beginning to point out aspects of the country. They were basically doing critical theory wrapped up in golden era aspiration raps. Therefore, this is definitely a classic which stands the test of time, and that reminds us that even in your most baggy, sagging, American Wu-Tangy boom bap influenced rendition, there's still a sense of Africa that you can convey in that. Even though a whole lot of these cats had Americanized accents, even though they had an approach to the hip-hop which didn't immediately ring South African, if you heard it, you had to listen closely. And if you listened really closely, you heard the direct references to a life that could only be attributed to South Africa. So ultimately, African raw material stands as a testament for, even till this day, the raw materials of our people, the raw material of our energy, of our body, of our hands is still being wasted as we complain about the bare necessities that we're supposed to be getting. So I feel like this project lingers on in a way that's extremely haunting. I think for all the members of Cashless who might be watching this, if they're not, if you're affiliated with them, just plug them into this, because I personally, the headspace generally, and I think South Africa in general, want to say thank you so much for being yourself, yet still straddling the line of global appeal. Thank you so much for being unapologetically spoken word oriented and not really caring about the musical chart topping angle, because there is room for poetry in this country that manifests itself through the rap art form. And I want to finally say, if I had to still give this a rating, it would definitely be a solid 8.5 to 9 out of 10, which is what I think it was back then and still is right now, considering the climate of what it came up in back then. I also want to say, Shout out to Mischief, RIP to one of the greatest MCs who ever did it, for his presence in this album as well. Shout out to Stogie T, Do Me back then, for also giving us the constant remembrance of how we begin to start this conversation of English as a medium that can be used to convey African ideas. So ultimately, yo man, I just want to give thanks. I want to give thanks to the fact that there's even hip-hop of this caliber to speak on years and years and years onto the history of this country. My name is VJ, the brother from the ancient mother. I'm cashless, I'm African, so contest you on your back again, and I got the legs of your Dolly Parton. Shout out to Snaz!